This frame once held a Rembrandt. It was stolen in 1990. The museum could replace it tomorrow. It refuses. For 35 years, this space has remained empty. I'm Julian, this is Painted Veil, and today we ask, why? When visitors enter the Dutch room of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, they step into a space designed not to change. Isabella Stewart Gardner opened the museum in 1903. She arranged it not chronologically, but compositionally. Paintings beside furniture, tapestries beside altarpieces, light carefully calibrated. In her will of 1924, she stipulated that nothing in the galleries was to be significantly altered. If the arrangement were changed, the collection could be removed from the museum entirely. It was one of the strictest curatorial clauses in American museum history. For nearly 90 years, that instruction held. Then, in the early hours of March 18, 1990, it was tested. And what followed would not simply remove paintings, it would reveal the philosophy of the institution itself. Isabella Stewart Gardner was not trained as a curator. She was born in New York in 1840 into a wealthy mercantile family and married Boston businessman John Lowell Jack Gardner in 1860. Boston society at the time was tightly structured and culturally conservative. Gardner moved through it, but she did not entirely belong to it. Travel changed everything. After the death of their only child in 1865, Isabella and Jack began traveling extensively through Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. In Venice, Florence, and Paris, she encountered collections arranged not as textbooks, but as environments, spaces where objects created atmosphere rather than chronology. She began collecting in the 1870s with the advice of the young art historian Bernard Berenson, acquiring works that reflected connoisseurship rather than fashion. By the 1890s, she was one of America's most ambitious private collectors, purchasing Titian, Botticelli, Vermeer, and Rembrandt at a moment when European aristocratic collections were dispersing. But Gardner was not only a collector, she was a cultural force in Boston. She supported musicians, writers, and scholars, hosted performances in her home, and used her collection as a social and intellectual laboratory. When her museum opened in 1903, she did not call it a gallery, she called it her house, and she expected it to remain that way. At 1:24 a.m., two men claiming to be Boston police officers were admitted through a side entrance. Security protocol was ignored. The men remained inside for 81 minutes. By the time they left, 13 works had been removed. The estimated value today exceeds $500 million. It remains the largest unsolved art theft in modern history. Among the works taken were Vermeer's The Concert, one of fewer than 35 known Vermeers, Manet's Chez Tortoni, and Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, painted in 1633. The canvases were cut from their frames, the frames were left behind, and that decision was deliberate. But what interests me more is what the museum did next. Because theft creates absence, institutional response defines meaning. The Storm on the Sea of Galilee depicts Christ calming a violent storm. The boat tilts diagonally across the canvas. Disciples strain against wind and water. The mast bisects the scene. It was Rembrandt's only seascape. The scholar, Ernst van der Wetering, described it as, quote, movement caught at its most unstable. Today that instability lies elsewhere. The painting exists only in reproduction, but the frame remains. gilded, substantial, carefully lit. When I first examined this case, I assumed the mystery centered on the perpetrators. The more I returned to the primary records, FBI case files, museum statements, historical accounts, the more something else emerged. Not the disappearance, the preservation of the void. The frame was not removed, it was maintained, and that preservation reframes the entire event. Storm on the Sea of Galilee was not taken alone. In the Dutch Room and adjoining galleries, other works disappeared that night, objects whose significance is quieter but no less revealing. One of them was a small painting long believed to be by Rembrandt's pupil, Govert Flinck, called Landscape with an Obelisk. For decades, it hung as part of Gardner's Dutch installation, admired as a 17th century evocation of classical ruins and northern light. Only later scholarship reassigned it to Flinck, a reminder that authorship itself can shift across time even as loss remains fixed. Nearby, the thieves removed 5 works on paper by Edgar Degas. They included drawings and pastel studies, images of jockeys, dancers, and figures in motion that reflected Degas' sustained interest in movement and observation. Works on paper occupied a central place in his practice throughout his career. Another work that was taken was a small bronze Chinese beaker or gu dating to the Shang dynasty more than 3,000 years ago. Gardner collected it as part of her instinct for juxtaposition, placing objects from distant cultures in visual conversation. What was taken that night did not belong to a single tradition. Flink's 17th century Dutch landscape hung beside Degas' studies of modern Parisian movement. Nearby stood a Shang dynasty ritual vessel cast more than 2 millennia before the birth of Rembrandt. Gardner assembled these works deliberately. She placed European painting, Asian antiquities, and modern works in visual dialogue, rejecting the chronological order favoured by museums of her time. Her installation was not organised by nation or period, it was organised by relationship. So when the thieves removed the objects, they disrupted that structure. What vanished was not only individual works, but the whole network Gardner had created between them. The empty spaces in the galleries mark where those relationships once existed. Later on the morning of March 18th, 1990, investigators entered the Dutch Room and found the Rembrandts and, of course, the other works gone, their empty frames all that was left behind. In most museums, a theft is followed by restoration of visual balance. Works are rearranged, gaps are closed. The Gardner Museum, however, did something unusual. It left the frames on the walls where they had always been. The museum has stated, quote, "The empty frames serve as placeholders for the missing works and as symbols of hope awaiting their return." It's an interesting and profound decision to leave visible the rupture this robbery caused, to bring focus and shine an intense light on the absence of these works. To remove the frames would soften that interruption. To leave them makes the interruption structural and permanent. Visitors who never saw the Rembrandts or other paintings still feel their loss, because the void is visible. The space is not neutral, it's charged. And in that sense, the theft did not erase the painting, it transformed it from object to absence. Some have even pointed to Isabella Stewart Gardner's will as one of the reasons the frames have been left empty on the walls. As we know, the will directs that the arrangement of objects in the galleries shall not be significantly altered at any time, at risk of the entire collection being removed from the museum. Even though the circumstances of the theft of 13 works could never have been anticipated, the fact that the empty frames were left presents a unique question regarding ongoing compliance with the will's strict conditions. At its most elementary and superficial reading, removing the frames, irrespective of the fact that they were now empty, would constitute an alteration to the museum which the will explicitly forbade. It's a curious legal point. Relevant too is the 2009 testing of the will's provisions when the museum petitioned the Massachusetts Probate and Family Court in order to construct a major addition designed by Renzo Piano, something the will of Isabella Gardner Stewart did not allow. The court approved the petition and the addition opened in 2012. In granting approval, the court accepted the museum's position that the expansion did not significantly alter the historic galleries governed by the will. The will was interpreted through judicial process as not pertaining to a new gallery. However, critically, the empty frames inhabited the original galleries, which the court found were very much subject to the will's provisions. On March 18, 2013, marking the 23rd anniversary of the theft, the FBI announced it had identified the thieves as members of, quote, a criminal organisation with a base in the Mid-Atlantic and New England. No arrests followed, and the investigation remains open. The museum currently offers a $10 million reward for information leading directly to recovery. The Rembrandts nor the other 13 works have been seen since, not the Vermeer, the Manet, or the Degas. Most of the coverage of the Gardner theft asks where the lost works are. That question remains unanswered and may never be. But what has been answered is how an institution can respond in the most powerful and visual way imaginable to the loss of some of its most prized works. I think the decision to leave the empty frames is profound, brave, and defiant. But more important than that, it's allowed those of us who never got to experience these works in person for ourselves to understand the sheer visual power of them through this revolutionary articulation of loss. In doing so, the museum has demonstrated agency. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'd love to hear your take. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Painted Veil, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Until next week, bye for now.